Hey everybody, it's nutritionist Dr. Mike Roussel, and welcome to this edition of the Dr. Mike Show. We got a special episode today. I'm calling it the Food Face-Off. So what I did was I went through and I picked 7 foods to go head-to-head. Foods that people are always wondering, should I eat this or should I eat this? Should I eat this or should I eat that? I went through, got a cool list of 7, and I'm going to give you the lowdown on which ones you should eat, which ones you shouldn't eat, and where it's even just stupid to think I need to eat one versus the other. Just eat both. All right, let's get into it. So first up, we're going to do one that's near and dear to my heart because, as many of you know, my PhD research was done with protein, specifically looking at beef protein and its impacts on cardiovascular disease and cardiometabolic disease. So the first one in our food face-off is beef versus chicken. Which one should you eat? Now, as the theme is going to be with a lot of these, you could do either. So generally people, and poultry or chicken, you can loop turkey into that, but in America, people basically just eat turkey one day out of the year, right? Or 2 if you count leftovers. So, chicken has generally been seen as a choice amongst people looking for a heart-healthy diet, a choice looking amongst bodybuilders. Chicken's always been a big one. Fitness-minded people, partly because chicken is just a very lean, protein-rich source, right? So it's a lot of quality protein, not a lot of fat, so it makes it very easy to fit into diets, especially lower fat diets. So if you're in a lower high protein, moderate to high carb diet, it's really the perfect thing. So poultry has always been a popular choice, but I'm really I'm going with beef here. Partly because I literally dedicated years of my life to studying if beef was an acceptable substitution in a heart-healthy diet compared to poultry. And guess what? The answer was you could eat whatever you want. And there were about 2 other clinical trials prior to the one that I ran, and the one that I did had a subsequent trial that also showed similar findings. But the 2 trials prior to that also found if you substituted beef or poultry, you get the same results. So in the end, it's eat what you want. And what I find is people generally prefer to eat beef over chicken. I kind of chickened myself out in a large, probably earlier in my life. I was hardcore chicken and broccoli, right? Chicken and vegetables. So especially chicken breasts. I have a hard time eating chicken breasts personally because they generally lack the flavor that I get from beef. I'll do chicken thighs more often than that. But, it really comes down to what do you want? What do you want to eat? And then if you look at also the lean factor, so back, it was years ago now, right? When I was doing my PhD work, there were 29 cuts of beef that met the USDA criteria for lean. And now there are so many more cuts, partly because butchers are getting a lot more creative in how they're making cuts of meat, trying to make cuts that are more affordable for people, while also having this great, tender and flavor. And so there are more lean cuts than you can count. Generally, when you go to the meat case at the supermarket, almost all the cuts you're going to see there qualify as lean. Some of them don't, like my personal favorite, ribeye. So if I could ever have a nutritional wish, it would be that ribeye becomes lean cut. Also, some of the other things like rib cuts and things like that might not be lean, so you just have to eat smaller amounts or trim the external fat. But from a lean standpoint, beef is generally going to be almost as lean as turkey, or lean enough to make it a primary protein. Some other notes, vitamins. So, it's not just about protein. So the other thing to look at is vitamins. Chicken is higher in a handful of B vitamins like thiamine and riboflavin, and beef is higher in B vitamins like vitamin B12 and folic acid. Beef also has about 2x the iron compared to chicken, and it also has zinc. So if you look at folic acid or folate, iron, protein, and the iron is a heme iron, well, same thing with chicken, it's also a heme iron. But you look at zinc, protein, B12, folate, and heme iron. Beef is actually my pick for a primary protein source for women who are pregnant or trying to get pregnant, because it just has a lot of those nutrients. So in that first trimester, blood volume is going to be increasing, by a lot. And so there's a greater iron need there. Zinc is also important for growth and immune function. You need folic acid to prevent neural tube defects. So actually, beef is a pretty cool protein and food source if you're in your first trimester of a pregnancy as well, which is something that most people wouldn't think about. The other thing is, when you're thinking about beef or chicken, one of the things that beef kind of gets a bad rap with has to do with potential carcinogens, right? And so what can happen with this is when you cook something over an open flame and you have external fat, like sometimes you do with cuts of beef, although I recommend you trim them. But when you get that external fat and the flame comes up, the fat melts and then it gets charred, right? And then can bounce back up on the meat. That's where the potential carcinogen comes in. But here's the crazy thing. This happens with all foods. So if you have vegetables and you marinate them in some sort of oil or you brush them with oil, the fat from those oils, if you cook it over an open flame, the exact same chemical reaction can happen. If you cook chicken with the skin on it, you get the same chemical reaction you get. So it's not something that's unique to beef fat. The moral of the story is, if you're going to cook over an open flame aggressively, trim whatever meat that you have, or use minimal oil and prevent that charring, which comes from the fat melting and then those fats oxidizing and then getting back up on the meat. Research also shows that if you use herbs and spices, which you should anyway, because if you have a vested interest in delicious food, use herbs and spices, and actually the antioxidants in those herbs and spices like oregano and rosemary can actually help reduce the formation of these pro-carcinogenic compounds. Now, one of the things that's also really important to remember is that we really actually don't even know a lot about these carcinogenic compounds. So I had a really interesting conversation with a scientist who studies these compounds for a living. And what he said is, yes, we know that they are pro-carcinogenic, but we don't really understand in the human body how much is required and what are a lot of the other factors. But I think it's better to be safe than sorry. So if you're going to cook foods, especially meats, over an open flame, make sure you trim the external fat or remove the skin. So when we look at beef versus chicken, my vote is for beef, but I think you can choose. The moral of the story is choose whichever one you prefer eating the most. All right? Next up, salmon versus tuna. So this is a great one, especially considering that most Americans don't eat fish unless it's a white fish. It's battered and fried. So this could be unique to a lot of people. So we're looking at salmon versus tuna. Which one are you going to pick? I'll give you a second to think about it. Okay, I'm picking salmon. Now, you can eat both, but I'm going to pick salmon because salmon has more omega-3 fatty acids, and generally people aren't getting enough omega-3 fatty acids. Also, salmon's going to be lower mercury in general than you're going to get with tuna fish. So you have more omega-3s, you have less potential toxic heavy metals, and for the most part, I think salmon is just more delicious. Part of that has to do with the higher fat content. So in this case, we're going for salmon. But why would you want to eat tuna? Tuna is generally a little bit more affordable. Like as an undergraduate, I lived off cans of tuna when I was in the lab. Like I would set up a reaction, go in the hallway, eat a can of tuna. I don't recommend that because one, it's not delicious. And if you do too much canned tuna, like a can a day, like some people would do, especially if you're using it for cost-saving protein benefits, you can run the risk of too much mercury. But tuna fish is also leaner. So if you're eating a calorie-restricted diet, the fat calories can add up really quick, and you might need to pick some leaner food choices, so tuna would be a really good one. So again, I'm going with salmon, but tuna is a viable option too. Don't turn your back on it, and try to find creative ways to eat it just different than a tuna fish sandwich. Next up, whole eggs versus egg whites. This is another classic food battle, right? Do you eat the whole egg or do you eat the egg whites? So the difference here is going to be the yolk. So if you have an egg white, one large egg white is going to give you about 3 grams of protein, right? One whole egg is going to give you about 6 grams of protein. So that yolk is bringing in 3 more grams of protein. And now an egg for the longest time was the gold standard of protein. From a bioavailability standpoint, that's really what we benchmarked everything against. It was the egg because it was so perfect. But also with that yolk, we get fat. So you get about 6 grams of fat coming along with those 3 grams of protein in the yolk. So now when you think about, if you've listened to shows before, you're like, well, we need to get 30 grams of protein at every meal. So that's a lot of eggs, especially if you're trying to get it from yolks because the fat's going to add up. Now that yolk, though, it brings a lot of things. Yes, it brings cholesterol, which is what gave eggs its bad rap for a long time. But what we now understand from additional nutrition research studies is that the cholesterol that we consume is not directly reflected in cholesterol levels in our blood. That being said, I don't think you should go crazy and eat 6 to 8 eggs every day, right? Because cholesterol still does play a role in overall health, and moderate consumption, I think, is recommended. However, that yolk does bring vitamin A, it brings some vitamin D, 2 key fat-soluble vitamins, and it also brings carotenoids. That's pro-vitamin A, things that help with eye health, skin health, and immune function. So what I generally like to do is mix egg yolks and egg whites. So for example, my go-to breakfast for a long time now is 2 pieces of Dave's Killer Bread, toasted. I do 3 lightly over easy eggs, so the yolk is still a little bit runny. Salt and pepper. I actually like to use Carving House, my friend Casey's seasoning company, Tacticalories. That's Carving House seasoning is great. Everything bagel seasoning from Trader Joe's, also phenomenal here. But then I'll also do a portion, half to a cup of egg whites that I'll also scramble. So what I do is I get all those great nutrients from the whole eggs that the yolk brings along, but then I also do some egg whites to bring my overall protein intake up without bringing the fat intake up as well, because I like to cook my eggs in a little bit of olive oil. So a mixture is always best. Now you can separate your eggs. So sometimes what we'll do is during the week we'll save it. If I'm going to do egg whites, I'll save the yolks so we can make ice cream on the weekends, because homemade ice cream is so much better than any ice cream you'll buy at the store. But I also will buy pasteurized egg whites. I was put on to pasteurized egg whites by Kyle Fields, who was a trainer that I met back in the day at Peak Performance. He used to drink them just straight out of the jug because he's a total savage. And they're pasteurized, so it's fine. It's not like eating a raw egg yolk, or excuse me, a raw egg white. But I'll do the can or the ones in the container more often because I feel like it's less wasteful. And if I were to save all the yolks, there's no way I'm going to make that much ice cream. And if I did, it wouldn't be good for my health. So whole eggs are the way to go. But egg whites are also great to bump up your protein intake if you need to control total fat. Next up, wild blueberries versus regular blueberries. This is almost a no-brainer. Now, blueberries are an incredible food. I hate the term superfood, but if you had to give it to one, I'd give it to blueberries and probably pistachios, and then we'd call it quits there. Blueberries are really good. They contain a lot of powerful antioxidants that have been shown to help reduce blood pressure and also improve cognitive health. And when you just didn't think blueberries could get any better, that's when wild blueberries came into play. Wild blueberries have more fiber and twice the antioxidants than regular blueberries. It's like, why would you even bother eating regular blueberries if you could eat its cousin, which has twice the antioxidants and more fiber? Now, the one downfall of wild blueberries is that they're very hard to get. So they're not grown all over the place. They're primarily actually grown in Maine, which is like another reason why Maine is awesome. But where I live in New York or in Vermont or anywhere else that's going to grow blueberries, they're generally going to be regular blueberries. So that limits the fresh version. It's hard to get fresh wild blueberries, but they're available frozen all the time. Now, it's pretty easy to know wild blueberry. One, because if you buy it frozen, it's all over the package that's wild blueberries and it has twice the antioxidants. But they're generally a lot smaller. So these smaller blueberries are going to be the wild ones. Now, another interesting thing to note, because the antioxidants are so important, that these antioxidants actually aren't digested very well, which is good that in wild blueberries, you're going to get double, because if your body doesn't take it up very well, it's nice to add a little bit extra, right? So you can get more of them. But what's really cool is the bacteria in your digestive system is going to take those antioxidants that don't get absorbed by your body, and it's actually going to use them as fuel. So it's like a prebiotic to fuel that good bacteria in your gut. Now, good bacteria in your gut does all kinds of great things. The one thing that probably is the number one on people's minds is going to be improves immune function, which is just a whole other discussion for a whole other time, how the bacteria in our digestive system, which is technically not inside of our body, right? Because technically it's on the outside, even though it's inside, can actually turn on and manipulate your immune system. It's pretty cool. But either way, fresh blueberries or regular blueberries versus wild blueberries every day of the week. All right. Next up, brown rice versus quinoa. Now this is a classic battle because for the longest time, brown rice was the go-to starch, right? I remember sitting when I was a graduate student, it was actually the first time I ever went to San Francisco. I went to an American Heart Association conference in San Francisco. And I went to a couple sessions. As a graduate student being in San Francisco for the first time, kind of like alone in San Francisco, it was very hard to stay for all the sessions. But some of the ones that I went to, I'll never forget. One of them was a comparison of looking at brown rice versus white rice and its impact on diabetes. This was a population-based study. And it was talking about the association of people who ate brown rice versus white rice and blood sugar control. And kind of the take-home message was that if people switched from brown rice to white rice to the tune of 1 cup a day, that there would be, X, I don't remember because it was a long time ago, but a significant reduction in blood sugar over the course of, over the population as a whole. Now, this sounds really interesting, but practically in your life, it's not going to happen. Switching from brown rice to white rice, switching from white rice to brown rice isn't going to have that significant of an impact on your blood sugar, that one switch. But it is a switch in the right direction because brown rice has more fiber and it also has more nutrients, because in white rice, the bran, that just gets removed and that has a lot of other vitamins and minerals. So brown rice should be your go-to rice. However, quinoa came along and people were like, oh, well, quinoa is amazing. It's a complete protein. It's high in fiber. You should always eat quinoa. Brown rice, not even that healthy. It's basically Cocoa Puffs, right? Not the case. Brown rice and quinoa are very similar. Yes, quinoa has essential amino acids and it's considered a complete protein. But the amount of protein related to the amount of carbohydrates, that ratio is so skewed. It's like 6-7 grams of protein per cup, where a cup is going to bring you closer to 50 grams of carbohydrate, right? So you can't eat enough quinoa to make it meaningful from a protein standpoint without skyrocketing your carbohydrate intake. So the complete protein nature of quinoa for someone who doesn't follow a vegan diet is more a nice to have than something you should just totally change your diet around for. Now, brown rice actually has more fiber than quinoa, just a little bit more, but if we're doing a head-to-head face-off here, I have to mention these sort of things. So brown rice versus quinoa, which one should you do? Quinoa seems a little bit more fancy. You see it on the menu and you're like, oh, it sounds a lot healthier. It's not really. Pick the one you like more. Quinoa has a much nuttier flavor than brown rice, and I can tell you, I can't get my kids to eat quinoa for anything, but they'll eat brown rice any day of the week. So brown rice or quinoa, pick whichever one you like the most. Okay, next up, almond milk versus regular milk. We're going to keep this one really short. I'm going to channel my inner ed lover, and we're going to challenge my video editing skills for this. Come on, son. Almond milk is not actually milk. Just because it's a liquid and it's white doesn't make it milk. You could take Elmer's glue, mix it up with some additional water so it was the consistency of milk. We wouldn't call it glue milk and then drink it. Okay? Almond milk, no. If you're allergic to milk or you have a lactose intolerance, if you're lactose intolerant, you should look at just a lactose-free milk. That would be the way to go. But the nutrients are so different. And basically they're taking, and it's not just almond milk, it could be cashew milk or whatever these other milks are. And they have to add in the calcium. They basically add in all the things that are already there in regular milk, and you're also short on protein. So unless there's some sort of specific dietary or moral reason why you're avoiding milk, just drink regular milk and don't worry about the almond milk. Last up, kefir versus yogurt. Now I'm talking regular yogurt, not Greek yogurt, because I got to keep this a fair fight. And if we're talking kefir, it's got to be plain, not the flavored stuff. Just like if we're talking yogurt, it's got to be plain, not the flavored stuff. Because when we add in the flavors, whether it's strawberry or strawberry banana or peach or blueberry or even vanilla, what comes with that is added sugars, right? And we don't need the added sugars in our life. And if we're going to enjoy added sugars, it shouldn't be in flavored kefir. We should enjoy it some other way, like a Reese's peanut butter cup or something like that. But if we look at these two foods, yogurt versus kefir, I'm going with kefir. Kefir has slightly more protein, a little bit less carbohydrates, slightly less sugar, but that tangy flavor to me is so good. Now, if you just don't like kefir because it's more drinkable than spoonable, I understand, go with yogurt, still a great choice. But kefir has more probiotics, and I think the more we can take these little steps in our day to get more probiotics in our diet to create that nice ecosystem of healthy bacteria in our gut, we should do it. So I'm going with kefir, although it's a very, very close tie from a nutritional standpoint. So pick what you like, but just kind of with beef versus chicken, there's enough to make me go with kefir. And, well, in beef versus chicken, I'm not going with kefir. Beef versus chicken, I'm going with beef. But in plain yogurt versus kefir, I'm going with kefir. That tangy flavor of it is really good. My one other caveat would be I've started making yogurt at home. This is what quarantine's done to me. I make yogurt at home now. And homemade yogurt is really tangy. I don't know about the probiotics because I don't have a microbiology lab here in my house, just an office. So I haven't been able to test the bacteria content, but it tastes like it's healthier, which should stand for something, right? So anyway, pick which one you like, but I'm going to go with kefir unless it's homemade yogurt. So that's going to wrap it up for the food face-off. I hope that you guys found this enjoyable, a little bit entertaining, and I hope it also answered your questions when you were looking at these two different foods. Should I eat this one or should I eat that one? Now, one of the things that I hope you also realize is that when all these comparisons, they're really close. And oftentimes, you can pick whichever one you want, and there's no real need to say, oh, I'm only going to eat this one, and I'm not going to eat that one. You know, one of the things I do the Just Fuel show with Kaizo over at Vita Hustle every 2 weeks, and I think that is such a reoccurring theme with what we talk about, that it's moderation, it's okay to have a little bit of this, pick the one you like. It's almost obnoxious how much we say that, but it's true. If you're making healthy choices and you're making good choices, like, hey, if you're talking about should I eat brown rice or quinoa, you're 95% of the way there, right? Because they're not instant potatoes and they're not French fries. So you've already made a lot of the choices in the right direction. The rest is just fine tuning and taste preference. So don't feel like you have to stomach stuff just because you feel like it's good for you, because chances are there's an option that you do like that's also just as good for you. That's going to wrap it up for this episode of the Dr. Mike Show. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Please go to iTunes. If you like the show, give me a good rating. If you don't like the show, give me a good rating anyway. And post a comment in the show notes, post a comment on YouTube, post a comment on iTunes, share with a friend. It's only through people like you that the word about the show is going to get out. If you have any things you want me to talk about on the show, any questions about anything we cover, just hit me up, direct message on Instagram, or via the contact us at microcell.com is the best way to do it. All right, I'll talk to you guys soon. Have a great day.